Welcome, everyone. Tonight, we slip into thick wool layers, pull our blankets close, and journey back to the unforgiving winters of the American frontier. Long before thermostats and indoor plumbing, settlers faced a season that tested the very edge of human endurance. Their homes were built from dirt, their warmth stolen from fire, and survival depended on grit, resourcefulness, and each other. As the wind howled through the plains and snow crept under doors, life didn't stop. It adapted. Children trudged through drifts to drafty schools. Mothers cooked with numb fingers. Fathers chopped wood until their backs gave out. Every breath was visible. Every task a struggle against the cold. So close your eyes, hear the creak of a sod house in the wind, feel the chill of snowmelt on bare skin, and step quietly into a world where simply making it through the season was a triumph.
Morning frost on the prairie, waking up in a sod house. The first thing you feel is not the straw-stuffed mattress beneath you, nor the weight of the heavy quilts piled on top. The first thing you feel is the cold. It is a deep, invasive cold that has seeped through the very walls of your home and settled in your bones. You open your eyes, but the darkness is almost total, a thick, heavy blackness broken only by the faintest gray light from a single, small window. You take a breath, and the air turns to a cloud of white mist in front of your face, your own breath, a small, fleeting ghost in the frigid air of the room. This is morning on the prairie, in a sod house, in the dead of winter. Your home is not made of wood or stone. It is made of the earth itself. It is a soddy, built from large, thick bricks of prairie sod cut directly from the land. The walls are 3 feet thick, dense blocks of soil and tangled grass roots. In the summer, these earthen walls are a blessing, keeping the interior cool and dark against the brutal sun. But in the winter, they hold the cold like a stone cellar. The floor beneath you is not wood, but hard, packed dirt, and the cold radiates up from it, a constant, chilling presence. The heart of the home, the small cast iron stove that provided a circle of life-giving warmth last night, is now a cold, dead thing. Its black iron is coated in a delicate lacework of frost. The fire has gone out, and with it, the only source of heat in this small, lonely world. You know without looking that the inside of the window pane is a solid sheet of ice, etched with beautiful, feathery patterns. You know that the water in the bucket by the door has a thick crust of ice on its surface. The cold is not just outside, it is inside, a guest that has made itself at home in every corner of the room. Stirring from the bed is an act of sheer will. The bed is a small island of relative warmth, a nest built of layers. The mattress is a simple cloth sack stuffed with whatever was available, straw, dried corn husks, or even prairie grass. Every scrap of fabric is precious, and here they are layered into a shield against the night's deep freeze. You are likely not sleeping alone. In a one-room sod house, the entire family, parents and children, often shares a single large bed, their bodies huddled together, sharing warmth like a litter of puppies. But the warmth is fleeting. The day's first and most urgent task awaits. The fire must be rekindled. You swing your legs out from under the quilts, and the shock of the cold floor on your bare feet is sharp and immediate. You are already wearing most of your clothes, long underwear, a wool shirt, as sleeping in them is the only way to stay warm. You move to the stove, your movements stiff and slow. Your fingers are already numb as you open the small iron door. You reach for the kindling, the small, precious slivers of dry wood you prepared the night before. You use a flint and steel, or perhaps a precious lucifer match, to strike a spark. You hold your breath, coaxing the tiny, fragile flame, feeding it tinder, then small sticks, until, with a soft roar, the fire catches. It is the first victory of the day. A small, growing circle of warmth begins to push back against the immense, indifferent cold of the prairie. But the day holds another, more daunting challenge: the outhouse. It stands some 50 yards from the house, a tiny, wind-blasted shack in the middle of a vast white expanse. The walk to it is a journey into the heart of the wind, a test of endurance before the day has even truly begun. This is the reality of waking in a sod house. It is a slow, cold, and deliberate process. It is a world without thermostats, without insulation, without the simple, taken-for-granted comfort of a warm room. It is a life lived in constant, intimate negotiation with the cold, and the day has only just begun.
Layers of wool and hope, getting dressed for the cold. In a world where the cold is a constant, physical threat, clothing is not about fashion. It is about survival. It is your personal, portable shelter, a fortress of fabric against the biting wind and the sub-zero temperatures. For the pioneer on the winter prairie, getting dressed is a slow, methodical process of building layers, a ritual of wrapping the fragile human body in a shield of wool and hope. You are already wearing your first layer, having slept in it for warmth. This is the Union suit, or what we would call long johns. It is a single, one-piece garment, usually made of wool or a heavy cotton flannel, that covers you from your wrists to your ankles. The wool is not the soft, fine merino we know today. It is a coarse, scratchy, and often oily fabric. The natural lanolin in the wool helps to make it water-resistant and warmer, but it also gives it a distinct, sheep-like smell. The itch is a constant, low-level companion, a sensation you have long since learned to ignore. This first layer is your second skin. Its job is to trap a thin layer of air against your body, which is then warmed by your own body heat. This is the fundamental principle of staying warm. Over the Union suit comes the next layer. For a man, this is a heavy wool or flannel shirt and a pair of thick, sturdy trousers, also made of wool or a heavy, canvas-like material called duck cloth. The colors are practical and somber. Dark blues, browns, grays, colors that do not show the dirt. For a woman, the next layer is a series of petticoats, long skirts made of wool or flannel, which create insulating pockets of air around her legs. Over this, she wears a simple long-sleeved dress, a bodice, and another heavy wool skirt. The key is layers. Multiple thin layers are far more effective than a single thick one, as each layer traps more air. A person might wear 3, 4, or even 5 layers of clothing, creating a bulky, onion-like silhouette. Now for the extremities, the parts of the body most vulnerable to the cold. Socks, as we know them, are a rare luxury. More often, you wear foot wrappings, squares of cloth that are carefully wound around the feet. Or you might have a pair of heavy, hand-knitted wool stockings, full of lumps and imperfections, but cherished for their warmth. To add extra insulation, the inside of your boots might be stuffed with straw, newspaper, or dried grass. It is a rustic but effective way to keep your toes from freezing. The boots themselves are heavy, leather things, often treated with grease or tallow to make them water-resistant.
They're stiff and hard, and rarely a perfect fit. The blisters and calluses on your feet are a permanent feature of your anatomy. On your hands, you wear mittens. Mittens are warmer than gloves, as they keep the fingers together, allowing them to share warmth. These are not store-bought. They are likely hand-knitted from scraps of wool yarn or ingeniously crafted from the felted remains of an old, worn-out coat. Every scrap of fabric is repurposed. Nothing is wasted. Finally, the outer layer. This is the greatcoat. A long, heavy coat of wool or canvas, sometimes with a sheepskin or fur lining if you are fortunate. Or it might be a buffalo hide coat, a prized possession acquired through trade. Its immense weight and thickness a formidable barrier against the wind. On your head, a simple wool cap, or perhaps one made from the fur of a raccoon or a rabbit you trapped yourself. You are now dressed. You feel heavy, encumbered. Your movements are stiff and restricted by the bulk of the layers, but you are armed. You are ready to face the outside world. Every layer is a prayer against the cold. Every piece of wool is a small, scratchy shield. It is a uniform of endurance, a testament to the simple, practical ingenuity of people who had to make their own warmth, one layer at a time. Ice in the bucket, hauling and heating water. In our world, water is an effortless convenience. It flows hot or cold with a simple turn of a tap. But for the pioneer in the Wild West winter, water was a chore. It was a heavy, frozen, and elusive resource that had to be fought for, hauled and heated, drop by precious drop. The simple act of washing your face in the morning was the culmination of a long and arduous process. The day's first major task, after the fire is lit, is the water run. There is no indoor plumbing. The source of water is outside, and in the winter, it is frozen. If the homestead is lucky enough to have a well, the process begins with the battle against the pump. The iron of the pump handle is so cold, it feels like it burns the skin of your bare hands, even through mittens. The mechanism is often frozen solid, and you might have to pour a little of yesterday's precious heated water over it just to get it to move. Then comes the hard, rhythmic work of pumping, your arm and back straining to bring the frigid, dark water up from deep within the earth. But for many, especially those in a sod house on the open prairie, there is no well. The only source of water is the nearby creek or river, and in the dead of winter, the creek is a solid, silent sheet of ice. You take your axe and a heavy wooden bucket and begin the walk. The wind is a constant, physical force pushing against you, trying to steal the warmth from your body. The creek is a half-mile away, and the journey itself is a challenge. When you arrive, you see the ice, thick and gray-green. You have to find a spot, often the same spot you used yesterday, and begin the work of chopping. You swing the axe, the blade biting into the ice with a sharp cracking sound. Chips of ice fly into the air. It is hard, jarring work. Your arms ache, your breath comes in ragged white clouds. You are not just chopping ice, you are chopping a hole into the frozen heart of the world. Finally, you break through. Dark, impossibly cold water wells up into the hole. You dip your bucket in, the water rushing in with a frigid splash. The bucket is now incredibly heavy. A full bucket of water weighs around 40 pounds, and now you must carry it all the way back to the house, your arm muscles screaming, your balance precarious on the icy ground. You might have to make this trip 2 or 3 times to get enough water for the family's basic needs for the day. Back in the soddy, the bucket of water is placed near the now roaring stove. But this is not water for drinking. It is full of silt and impurities. This water is for washing, for cleaning.
The drinking water is often melted snow, which is cleaner. A large pot is kept on the stove, constantly being filled with clean snow, which slowly melts into a supply of potable water. And every drop of warm water is a product of labor. A kettle is always on the stove, heating water for a cup of coffee, or for washing the dishes, or for the morning's ablutions. To wash your face, you do not splash water from a running tap. You pour a small amount of the heated water from the kettle into a tin basin, mix it with some of the cold water from the bucket, and use this small, precious quantity to wash away the sleep from your eyes. The gray used water is not thrown away. It will be saved and used for scrubbing the floor or for some other cleaning task. Water is work. It is the weight of the bucket, the shock of the cold, the hiss of the kettle on the stove. Every drop is earned, and this daily, relentless struggle for the most basic element of life is a profound and constant reminder of how thin the line is between survival and hardship in the frozen wilderness.
Cooking without a kitchen, cast iron, and cold fingers. In the one-room world of the pioneer homestead, there is no separate room called a kitchen. The kitchen is simply the space around the fire. It is a place of immense importance, the source of the warmth and the calories that keep the family alive through the brutal winter. But cooking here is a constant battle against the cold, with primitive tools and a limited, monotonous pantry of ingredients. The heart of this kitchen is the cast iron stove, or, in a more rustic cabin, the open hearth. The stove is the family's most prized possession, a heavy black beast that radiates heat and provides a flat surface for cooking. Keeping it fed with a steady supply of firewood is a never-ending job. The tools of the cook are few, but they are heavy and durable. There's the cast iron skillet, the workhorse of the frontier kitchen, used for everything from frying salt pork to baking cornbread. There's a large cast iron Dutch oven, perfect for making the slow-cooked stews that are a staple of the winter diet. A large kettle for boiling water, a coffee pot, a few tin plates, some simple knives and wooden spoons. That is the entire arsenal. The cook, usually the woman of the house, works with fingers that are often stiff and numb with the cold. The ingredients themselves are a challenge. In the dead of winter, the root cellar, a small pit dug under the floor, is the only source of fresh vegetables. She pulls out potatoes, onions, and turnips, their skins wrinkled and soft after months of storage. They are cold to the touch, their flesh hard as stone. The meat is not fresh, it is preserved. There is salt pork, packed in barrels of brine, its meat incredibly salty and tough. Or there is dried, smoked venison meat or buffalo meat, hard as a piece of wood. Before any of these can be cooked, they must be soaked for hours in precious water to draw out some of the salt and to rehydrate the tough fibers. Let us imagine the preparation of the day's main meal. The cook begins by slicing off a few pieces of salt pork and placing them in the hot skillet. The sizzle and the smell of the rendering fat is one of the most comforting sounds and smells of the day. Once the fat is rendered, the pork is removed, and the chopped onions and potatoes are added to the skillet to fry in the hot grease. Flour is a precious commodity, stored in a bin to keep it dry and safe from mice. It is a coarse, whole wheat flour, nothing like the fine white flour we know. It is used to make a dense, heavy sourdough bread, the starter for which is a living thing, kept alive and fed through the long winter. Or it is used to make simple, unleavened biscuits or cornbread, baked right in the skillet. The meal is a one-pot affair. A stew of rehydrated venison, potatoes, and onions, thickened with a little flour, simmering for hours on the back of the stove, filling the small soddy with a rich, savory aroma. It is a simple, monotonous diet, but it is a diet of survival. It is heavy in fat and carbohydrates, providing the immense number of calories needed to fuel a body that is constantly burning energy just to stay warm. There are no delicate flavors. The primary seasonings are salt, pepper if available, and the ever-present taste of wood smoke. But to a family that has spent the day working in the biting wind,
A bowl of this hot, greasy, and filling stew is the greatest luxury imaginable. It is warmth. It is life. It is a small victory against the vast, hungry cold that lies just outside the door. The sound of the sizzling skillet and chopping fades.
Keeping warm at night. Bricks, stones, and shared beds. As the pale winter sun disappears below the horizon, the temperature on the prairie plummets. The brief, relative warmth of the day is gone, and the long, deep, and dangerous cold of the night begins to set in. For the pioneer family, the setting of the sun marks the beginning of a quiet, nightly battle for warmth. A battle fought not with grand gestures, but with the simple, ingenious use of stored heat, layers, and the oldest source of warmth of all, each other. The fire in the cast iron stove, which has been the center of life all day, is carefully banked for the night. This means loading it with a large, slow-burning log or a number of large, smooth stones, and then restricting the airflow so that it smolders slowly through the night rather than burning out completely. This will not provide much heat, but it will keep a bed of embers alive, making it easier to restart the fire in the morning's bitter cold. The family prepares for bed, but the preparations have little to do with hygiene. They are about heat. One of the most common and effective techniques is the use of heated objects. All evening, a few bricks or a number of large, smooth stones have been sitting on the hearth or on top of the stove, absorbing its heat. Now, just before bedtime, these are carefully wrapped in thick pieces of cloth, scraps of old flannel or wool, to prevent them from burning the skin or the bedding. These hot bundles are then placed at the foot of the bed, under the heavy quilts. They are primitive hot water bottles, and they radiate a slow, steady, and incredibly comforting warmth that will last for several hours, helping to fight off the chill and to prevent the feet from becoming painfully cold. The bed itself is a fortress against the cold. The straw-stuffed mattress provides a layer of insulation from the cold dirt floor. But the real defense is the mountain of bedding piled on top. There are heavy wool blankets and, most importantly, the quilts. Quilting was an essential pioneer skill. Every scrap of fabric from worn-out clothing was saved, cut into squares, and painstakingly stitched together to form a new, warm, and often beautiful bed covering. These quilts are not light and fluffy. They're heavy, dense, and full of the memories of the clothes they were made from. The family might sleep under 3, 4, or even 5 of these layers, their combined weight a comforting, pressing presence. And then there is the shared warmth of bodies. In a one-room cabin, the entire family often slept together in one large bed. The parents and the smallest children would occupy the center, with the older children on the edges. There was no privacy, but there was a deep, communal warmth. This was not about comfort, but about survival. The collective body heat of the family, trapped under the heavy quilts, created a small pocket of warmth in the vast freezing room. Even the family dog had a role to play. The dog would often be allowed to sleep at the foot of the bed, its warm, furry body an excellent foot warmer. The phrase, "a three-dog night," is said to come from these times, a night so cold that you needed 3 dogs in the bed to keep from freezing. The family settles in for the night, huddled together in their nest of straw, quilts, and shared body heat. They listen to the sound of the wind howling outside, a lonely, menacing sound. They can feel the temperature in the room dropping. But here, in their small, shared space, they have created a fragile truce with the cold. It is a warmth that is earned, a warmth that is shared, a quiet, breathing warmth that is the only defense they have against the long, dark, and frozen night.
Chopping firewood, the never-ending chore. In the world of the Wild West winter, there was a simple, brutal equation that governed all of life. No firewood, no heat. No heat,
no cooked food. No heat, no life. The procurement of firewood was not a weekend hobby or a rustic pastime. It was a constant, relentless, and life-sustaining chore. A daily battle to keep the small, hungry god of the cast-iron stove appeased. For the settler, in a wooded area, in a log cabin nestled in the mountains or a forest, the source of the fuel was obvious, but the work was no less demanding. It began with felling a tree. This was done not with a chainsaw, but with a long two-man saw, or with the slow, patient work of a single felling axe. The sound of the axe biting into the trunk of a great pine or oak, the sharp crack of the wood, the shower of chips, this was the sound of a man making his own warmth. Once the tree was down, the real work began. The branches were stripped, and the massive trunk was sawed into manageable lengths. These heavy rounds then had to be split. This was the iconic work of the frontiersman. He would stand around on its end, heft a heavy splitting maul or axe, and with a powerful, practiced swing, bring it down. A clean split, with the wood parting with a satisfying crack, was a small victory. A stubborn, knotty piece of wood could resist for hours, a frustrating and exhausting opponent. The split wood was then stacked in a great pile near the cabin. The wood pile. A large, well-stocked woodpile was a source of immense pride and security. It was a visible measure of a family's foresight and industry. To let the woodpile dwindle was to invite disaster. But for the pioneer on the Great Plains, the homesteader in a sod house in Nebraska or Kansas, the situation was far more desperate. This was the treeless prairie. There were no trees to draw from. The only trees grew in thin, precious ribbons along the rivers and creeks. This wood was fiercely guarded and quickly depleted. So the prairie settler had to be more creative. They would travel for miles to gather the dead branches of the cottonwood trees that grew by the river. They learned to burn other things. One of the most common fuels of the sod house was the prairie coal, dried buffalo dung, or chips. In the late autumn, the entire family would go out onto the plains with sacks and wagons to collect this abundant, natural fuel. It burned hot and surprisingly clean, with a smoky, grassy smell. Another source of fuel was twisted hay. The family would take the long prairie grass, twist it into tight, dense bundles, and feed these into the stove. It burned fast, meaning the stove had to be constantly fed, but it was a source of heat. And in the most desperate of times, they would even burn dried sunflowers or corn cobs. The chore of bringing the fuel into the house was a constant one. A small wood box or bin next to the stove was always being emptied and always needing to be refilled. It was often the job of the children to make the endless trips out to the frozen wood pile or the stack of buffalo chips, their arms loaded, their faces stinging from the cold. The fire was a hungry beast. It consumed the fruits of this labor at an alarming rate. The man of the house knew that his work was never truly done. He was in a constant race against the consumption of the fire. His aching back, his calloused hands, the deep, satisfying warmth of the stove, these were all part of the same cycle. It was a simple, profound, and endless loop of labor and reward, the rhythm of an axe that kept the winter at bay.
Frontier fashion. Style meant survival. On the frontier, a person's clothing was their first and most important tool. It was a mobile shelter, a suit of armor against the elements. The concept of fashion as a statement of style was a distant luxury. For the pioneer, the trapper, and the homesteader, fashion meant survival, and style was dictated not by the salons of Paris, but by the harsh, practical realities of the American West. The materials were what you could hunt, what you could trade for, or what you could painstakingly make with your own two hands. The most iconic and essential material of frontier clothing was buckskin. This was leather,
usually from deer, but also from elk or antelope, that had been tanned in a way that left it remarkably soft, pliable, and quiet. The process of brain tanning, often learned from Native American tribes, used the animal's own brain to treat the hide, a difficult and smelly process that resulted in a beautiful, creamy-colored leather. A frontiersman's buckskin shirt or leggings were the height of practical design. The soft leather was comfortable, durable, and it made almost no noise as he moved through the woods, a critical advantage for a hunter. The characteristic fringe that often decorated the seams was not just for show. The thin leather strips helped to channel rainwater off the garment, allowing it to dry faster. For the deepest cold, nothing could beat the warmth of animal fur and hide. The great buffalo robe was a possession of immense value. It was a blanket, a coat, and a bed all in one. To be wrapped in a buffalo robe was to be enveloped in a near impenetrable shield of warmth. Men who spent their lives outdoors, like the mountain men, often wore coats made of buffalo hide with the thick, matted fur turned inwards. They were incredibly heavy and cumbersome, but they were the ultimate defense against the Arctic winds of the high plains. Smaller animals also contributed to the frontier wardrobe. A hat made from raccoon or beaver fur was not a fashion statement. It was an essential piece of insulation for the head. Mittens lined with rabbit fur provided a soft, deep warmth for the hands. For the homesteading family, however, buckskin and fur were often luxuries. Their clothing was based on the two materials they could produce or afford: wool and cotton. As we've seen, wool was the undisputed king of winter fabrics. It was spun into yarn and knitted into stockings, mittens, and scarves. It was woven into a heavy, dense cloth called homespun, which was used to make trousers, skirts, and coats. Cotton, in the form of heavy canvas or denim, was prized for its durability. It was used for work trousers and jackets, tough enough to withstand the abrasion of farm labor and the constant snagging of prairie brush. Every garment was an investment of time or money. Clothes were not thrown away when they wore out. They were patched and then patched again. A pair of trousers might have patches on the knees made from a different material, the elbows of a shirt reinforced with scraps of leather. When a garment was finally beyond repair, it was not discarded. It was cut up, its usable parts salvaged to patch other clothes, or cut into strips to be woven into a rag rug, or pieced together for a quilt. The life cycle of a piece of fabric was long and honorable. This was a world of hand-stitching, of making do, of an ingenuity born from necessity. The style was one of function. The aesthetic was one of pure, unadorned practicality. A person's clothing told the story of their life. The leather patch from a fall, the faded fabric from years in the sun, the hand-stitched seam from a fireside repair. It was a fashion of pure survival.
Blizzard traps, when snow became a cage. The winter wind on the prairie is a constant companion, a restless, sighing presence. But sometimes that sigh can rise to a shriek. Sometimes a gentle snowfall can transform, with terrifying speed, into a blizzard. For the pioneer in their small, isolated homestead, a blizzard was not just a weather event, it was a siege. It was a time when the world disappeared, and the snow became a soft, white, and deadly cage. It might begin with a subtle change in the sky, a gray, uniform cloud cover that descends, making the world feel small and close. The wind picks up, its low moan rising in pitch. Then the first snowflakes begin to fall, thick and fast. Within an hour, the world is gone. The visibility drops to zero. You cannot see the barn from the house. You cannot see the outhouse. You cannot see the horizon. There is only a swirling, blinding chaos of white. This is a whiteout, and it is one of the most dangerous phenomena of the plains. A person who ventures out into it can become disoriented and lost within a matter of feet, wandering in circles until they collapse from exhaustion, and freeze to death, sometimes just yards from their own front door. The family is now trapped inside their soddy or cabin. The first and most important task is to ensure they do not lose their way to their essential outbuildings. A rope is tied from the back door of the house to the door of the barn. This is a lifeline. To get to the livestock to feed them, a person will cling to this rope, their only guide in the roaring whiteness. Inside the house, the atmosphere is strange and surreal. The wind howls like a hungry animal, a constant, deafening roar that seems to shake the very foundations of the small home. It drives the fine, powdery snow into every tiny crack and crevice. A small drift of snow begins to form under the door. The small windows become useless. The glass, if there is any, is quickly coated on the outside with a thick, opaque layer of ice and snow. The world is sealed off. The family is living in a dim, lamp-lit twilight, with no way of knowing if it is day or night, except by the slow ticking of a clock, if they own one. The snow begins to pile up. It drifts against the walls of the house, burying it, sometimes right up to the roofline. This can actually provide a layer of insulation, muffling the sound of the wind and making the house slightly warmer. But it is also a terrifying form of burial. The greatest fear is the roof. On a log cabin, the sheer weight of the accumulated snow can become immense. The family listens to the groaning and creaking of the roof beams, praying they will hold. A roof collapse in the middle of a blizzard is almost a certain death sentence. The days blur together. The family lives in a small, enclosed world, their only companions each other and the sound of the storm. They tell stories, they mend clothes. They simply sit and listen to the wind. The isolation is profound. They're an island of life in a vast, chaotic ocean of snow. The blizzard is a powerful and humbling reminder of their own fragility, of the immense, untamable power of the natural world they are trying to conquer. All they can do is wait and hope and keep the fire burning.
The outhouse ordeal, nature's coldest throne. Of all the daily hardships faced by the pioneers in the Wild West winter, few were as universally dreaded, as profoundly uncomfortable, and as starkly primitive as the trip to the outhouse. In an era that lacked even the most basic indoor plumbing, this small, isolated shack was the only option. And in the freezing cold, it was an ordeal of the highest order. Let us imagine the moment of necessity strikes, in the middle of a cold winter's day. You cannot simply walk down a warm hallway to a private, comfortable room. You must prepare for an expedition. You begin by adding another layer of clothing. You pull on your heavy greatcoat, your mittens, your fur-lined hat. You are bundling up not for a pleasant walk, but for a brief, brutal assault by the elements. You open the door of your sod house or cabin, and the wind hits you like a physical blow, snatching the warm air from the room and replacing it with an icy blast. The outhouse stands a good distance from the house, for obvious reasons of smell. The walk to it is a journey across a frozen, windswept landscape. The snow is deep, and you trudge through it, your boots sinking with every step. The wind howls in your ears, a high, mournful sound. It drives the fine, sharp snow into your face, stinging your exposed skin. You reach the outhouse. It is a small, crude, and lonely structure, often built from whatever scrap lumber was available. It is not insulated. It is not heated. It is, in effect, a simple wooden box to concentrate the wind and the cold. You pull open the flimsy wooden door, its hinges groaning in protest. The interior is dark and shockingly cold. The wind whistles through the cracks in the walls. Sometimes a drift of snow has blown in under the door, covering the floor in a fine white powder. The toilet itself is a simple wooden plank with 1 or 2 holes cut into it, placed over a deep pit. The wood of the seat is so cold it feels like it burns the skin on contact. The brief moments you spend here are a study in misery. The cold seeps into you, making your muscles clench. The wind seems to find every gap in your clothing. You do not linger. Urgency is the only thing that brought you here, and it is the only thing that can hurry the process. For toilet paper, you use what is available. A stack of old newspapers, a well-read mail-order catalog, or even dried corn cobs. It is a rough, uncomfortable solution to a basic human need. And then the journey back. You burst out of the cold, dark shack and back into the slightly less cold, gray light of the day. You trudge back through the snow, your body clenched against the cold, your only thought the promised land of the warm stove. When you finally get back inside, stamping the snow from your boots, the warmth of the room feels like a miracle. You stand by the stove, soaking in the heat, feeling the life slowly return to your numb extremities. The outhouse ordeal is a powerful reminder of the profound lack of comfort that defined pioneer life. It was a daily, unavoidable encounter with the raw, uncivilized reality of their world. It was a place where there was no shelter, no dignity, and no escape from the brutal, humbling power of the cold.
Mail in winter. Letters lost in the snow. In the deep isolation of a Wild West winter, a letter was more than just a piece of paper. It was a lifeline. It was a connection to the world left behind, a proof that family and friends still existed. A fragile thread of human contact stretched across hundreds of miles of frozen wilderness. But getting that letter to its destination in the dead of winter was a task of heroic and often perilous proportions. The mail did not stop for the snow. The United States Postal Service was a symbol of the nation's reach, a promise that the government could connect even its most remote and isolated citizens. And the people who fulfilled that promise, the rural mail carriers, were some of the toughest and most resilient figures on the frontier. Let us imagine one such carrier making his route in the mountains of Colorado or the plains of Wyoming. He is not in a warm truck. He is on horseback, or sometimes, when the snow is too deep for a horse, on snowshoes, with the mail bag slung over his shoulder. His route is not a few blocks. It is a 100-mile loop of scattered homesteads, mining camps, and tiny settlements, a route that can take him a week or more to complete. He travels alone. His only companions are his horse and the vast, silent, snow-covered landscape. The dangers are constant. There is the cold, a relentless enemy that seeps into his bones. He is bundled in layers of wool and buffalo hide, but the chill is a constant threat. Frostbite is a persistent danger, a silent predator that can claim his fingers, his toes, his nose before he even realizes it. The route itself is treacherous. The familiar summer trails are buried under feet of snow. He must navigate by instinct, by the shape of a distant snow-covered butte, by the course of a frozen river. A wrong turn can lead him into a deep drift or a hidden ravine. An avalanche in the high country is a sudden thundering death that can bury a man and his horse in an instant. He must cross frozen rivers, testing the ice carefully before urging his horse across, listening for the terrifying groan and crack that signals a breakthrough into the lethally cold water below. He faces the threat of blizzards that can appear with shocking speed, forcing him to find or build a makeshift shelter and wait out the storm. His stops are small islands of humanity in the wilderness. He is more than just a mailman. He is a newsbringer, a carrier of gossip, a walking newspaper. At each isolated cabin, he is a welcome guest. He is given a hot meal, a cup of coffee, a place by the fire. He shares the news from the next valley over. He tells of the conditions of the trail. He delivers the precious letters that are the only link to the outside world. For the homesteader, the arrival of the mail carrier is a major event. They watch the horizon for days, hoping to see his familiar figure emerge from the snow. A letter from back east, from family in Ohio or New York, is a treasure. It is read aloud by the firelight, again and again, its words a comfort against the profound loneliness of the frontier. The mail order catalog he brings is a source of dreams, its pages filled with goods and fashions from a world of unimaginable comfort and abundance. The mail carrier does not get rich. His pay is meager. He does it for the small wage, but also for a sense of duty, of pride in his own toughness and his ability to conquer the wilderness. He is a quiet, unsung hero of the West, his lonely, frozen journeys a testament to the human need to connect, to communicate, to send a small piece of oneself across the vast, then silent snow.
Children in winter, playtime and peril. For an adult, the frontier winter was a season of labor, of anxiety, and of endless grinding chores. But for a child, winter could also be a time of magic. The same snow that trapped the adults and burdened their lives could transform the bleak, brown prairie into a vast, white playground, a world of new and exciting possibilities. When the morning's chores were done, the wood box filled, the water hauled, the animals fed, the children would be allowed to go outside and play. They would burst out of the dark, smoky soddy into the bright, cold, and dazzling world of the snow. They were bundled in so many layers of wool and homespun cloth that they looked like small, round bundles of rags. Their movements were clumsy and stiff, but their excitement was boundless. There were no plastic sleds or manufactured toys. Their play was a product of ingenuity and imagination. A sled might be made from a large piece of curved tree bark or from the staves of an old barrel nailed together. The steep, drifted side of a ravine became a thrilling sledding hill. The shouts and laughter of the children would be the only sound to break the immense silence of the prairie. They built snow forts, their mittened hands packing the wet snow into solid walls. They waged epic snowball fights, their ammunition plentiful and free. But even this simple game held a danger. A snowball packed too hard, with a piece of ice or a rock at its core, could be a dangerous weapon. A soaker, a snowball dipped in water and allowed to freeze solid, was a forbidden and feared projectile. They made snow angels, falling back into the deep, soft powder and waving their arms and legs, leaving the ghostly impression of a winged being on the surface of the world. They tracked animals in the snow, learning to distinguish the delicate prints of a rabbit from the paw marks of a coyote. But this world of winter play was always bordered by peril. The children were given strict and repeated warnings. Do not wander too far from the house. Do not go near the creek where the ice is thin. Be home before the sun begins to set. Getting lost in the snow was a terrifyingly easy thing to do. The landscape, with its familiar landmarks buried under a blanket of white, could become disorienting. A child chasing a rabbit could lose their bearings in a matter of minutes. And the cold was a constant, insidious threat. The children, absorbed in their play, might not notice their feet growing numb inside their straw-stuffed boots. They might not realize their cheeks were turning a pale, waxy white, the first sign of frostbite. The mother would call them in periodically, to stand by the stove, to check their hands and feet, to force a hot drink upon them before letting them go back out. The winter playtime was a brief and precious respite from a life that was otherwise filled with adult responsibilities. It was a time for them to be children,
to experience the joy and wonder of their stark and beautiful world. But it was a joy that was always lived in the shadow of a deep and abiding respect for the power of the winter, a lesson that was taught from the earliest age. The snow is a beautiful playground, but it is also a merciless and unforgiving wilderness.
School in the cold. One stove for 30 kids. For the children of the frontier, education was a privilege, not a guarantee. And in the depths of winter, attending school was an act of pure, unadorned determination. It was a journey through the cold and a lesson in endurance long before the first book was ever opened. The schoolhouse itself was often the simplest of buildings. It was a one-room log cabin, or a soddy, just like the children's own homes. It was small, it was crude, and it was often poorly built, with drafts whistling through the chinks in the walls. The journey to this school was the first test of the day. A child might have to walk 2, 3, or even 5 miles through deep snowdrifts and in the face of a biting wind. They would arrive at the schoolhouse, their faces red and raw from the cold, their eyebrows and the scarves around their faces caked with frozen breath. They would stamp the snow from their boots and enter the one room that was their entire world of learning. The room is dominated by a single large potbelly stove, which stands in the center. This stove is the sun around which the small solar system of the classroom revolves. The children shed their outer layers of coats and mittens, hanging them on pegs near the stove to dry, filling the room with the smell of damp wool. The seating is arranged in a strict geography of warmth. The desks or benches closest to the stove are the most prized real estate. The children often rotate their seats throughout the day so that everyone gets a chance to be near the life-giving heat. The child sitting by the window might be shivering, his fingers too numb to hold his chalk, while the child next to the stove is sweating. The teacher, often a young, unmarried woman, boarding with a local family, has a job that is about more than just teaching. She is also the janitor, the nurse, and the firekeeper. Her day begins long before the children arrive, with the difficult task of starting a fire in the cold stove. She must keep it fed with wood throughout the day, a constant and vital chore. The lessons are simple and rote. The children, a mix of ages from 6 to 16, all in the same room, practice their letters on small, personal slates. The sound of the chalk squeaking is a constant refrain. They recite their multiplication tables in a low, monotonous chant. They read aloud one by one from a shared and well-worn copy of a McGuffey reader. The challenges are immense. The light is poor, coming from the few small ice-covered windows. The ink for the older students to practice their penmanship often freezes in its well. The teacher must be a master of multitasking, teaching a lesson on long division to the older children while helping a 6-year-old form his first letters. But despite the cold, despite the hardships, the one-room schoolhouse is a place of profound importance. It is a beacon of civilization in the wilderness. It is a promise of a future that might be different from the hard manual labor of the parents. It is a place where a child can learn about the world beyond their own small, isolated valley. To sit in that drafty room, with numb fingers and the smell of wet wool in the air, huddled as close as possible to the glowing iron stove, is to be a part of a quiet, determined, and deeply hopeful enterprise. It is the simple, powerful act of learning in the heart of the frozen West.
Candlelight evenings, quiet, dim, and freezing. As the winter sun makes its early descent, casting long blue shadows across the snow-covered prairie, the world outside the pioneer's cabin is given over to the immense, cold darkness of the night. Inside, the family retreats into a small, fragile bubble of light and quiet activity. The evening is a time of slow rhythms, of simple tasks, and of a deep, shared stillness. The primary source of light is not electricity, but something far more precious and far less powerful. It might be the flickering, dancing light of the fire in the hearth. Or, more often, it is the small, steady flame of a single candle or a simple oil lamp. These sources of light are not to be wasted. Candles are often made at home, a laborious process of repeatedly dipping a wick into melted tallow or animal fat. They are smoky, they smell of rendered fat, and they provide a dim, yellow, and wavering light. An oil lamp burning lard or kerosene is a brighter, more modern luxury. The family gathers in the small circle of light cast by this single flame. The rest of the room is lost in deep shadow. This small pool of light is their entire world for the evening. It is a world of quiet, focused activity. The woman of the house might be at her sewing. The winter evenings are a time of mending. She stitches a patch onto the knee of her sewn trousers, her needle flashing in the candlelight. Or she might be knitting a new pair of socks, the rhythmic click-clack of her needles a soft, comforting sound in the quiet room. Every stitch is a small act of war against the cold. The man might be working on a piece of leather, repairing a broken harness for the horse, his knife carefully carving the thick hide. Or he might be whittling a piece of wood, making a new handle for a tool, or a simple wooden toy for a child. These are not hobbies. They are the essential, ongoing tasks of maintenance and self-sufficiency. If the family is literate, and if they are fortunate enough to own a book, this is the time for reading. The family Bible is often the only book in the house. The father might read a chapter aloud, his slow, deliberate voice the only sound in the room. The stories of the Old Testament, of hardship, of faith, of endurance, would have resonated deeply with their own lives. For the children, the evening is a time of stories, not from a book, but from memory. The parents tell the old folk tales they learned from their own parents. They tell stories of their own journey west, of the life they left behind. This is how history is passed down in the quiet, intimate theater of the fireside. There is no television, no radio, no digital distractions. The evening is a time of profound quiet, of deep connection to the people in the room and the simple task at hand. It is a time for the family to be a family, their lives drawn together by the shared circle of light. As the hour grows late, the fire is banked, the precious candle is snuffed out, plunging the room into darkness. The family makes their way to the cold bed, their minds filled with the stories and the quiet rhythms of the evening. It is a simple, spare, and deeply human end to a long and difficult day.
Snow and silence. Frontier isolation in winter. The most profound and unsettling feature of a Wild West winter was not the cold, not the hunger, but the silence. After a heavy snowfall, a great deep hush would descend upon the land. The snow acted as a thick blanket, absorbing all sound, muffling the world, and creating an atmosphere of intense and sometimes terrifying isolation. For the pioneer family in their lonely homestead, the world would shrink to the size of their own small cabin. The nearest neighbor might be 5 miles away, a distance that is a pleasant walk in the summer, but an impossible and life-threatening journey in the depths of winter. The roads, which are little more than dirt tracks, disappear completely under the drifts. The world is sealed off. The family is an island of humanity in a vast, white, and silent sea. They might go for weeks without seeing another human face, without hearing another human voice outside their own small circle. The silence is not peaceful. It is a heavy, ringing silence, a silence that is full of the absence of sound. There is no bird song. There is no rustle of leaves. There is only the low, mournful sigh of the wind and the sound of one's own heartbeat in the quiet of the night. This profound isolation has a powerful psychological effect. The days stretch out, long and monotonous. The view from the window is always the same, an endless, unchanging expanse of white. The family is thrown back entirely on its own resources, both physical and emotional. The small one-room cabin, which is a cozy refuge at first, can begin to feel like a prison. The same faces, the same conversations, day after day. The small irritations of family life are magnified in the close, confined space. The lack of privacy becomes a heavy burden. The question is always there, unspoken, hanging in the quiet air. Will we make it through? What if someone gets sick? The nearest doctor is 100 miles away, an impossible distance. What if we run out of food? There is no one to turn to for help. What if the roof gives way under the weight of the snow? No one will hear our cries. This is a life lived without a safety net. The family's survival depends entirely on their own foresight, their own strength, their own resilience. They develop rituals to fight off the oppressive silence. They sing songs in the evening. They tell stories. They read the Bible aloud. They create their own small world of sound to push back against the great, empty quiet outside. And they watch. They watch the sky for any change in the weather. They watch the dwindling woodpile, the level of the flour in the bin. And they watch the horizon, hoping for a sign of life, for the small, dark figure of a traveler or a mail carrier, a sign that they are not, after all, completely alone in the world. The frontier winter is a test of the human spirit's ability to endure not just physical hardship, but the deep existential challenge of utter and profound isolation. It is a silence that can either break a person or forge them into something stronger, quieter, and more resilient than they ever imagined they could be.
Cabin fever, when winter went on too long.
There is a point in every long winter, usually in the gray, endless months of February or March, when the simple hardship of survival can curdle into something more difficult, more psychological. This is the onset of cabin fever. It is the moment when the cozy refuge of the homestead begins to feel like a cage, and the profound silence of the prairie starts to echo, not with peace, but with a growing internal tension. Cabin fever is not a formal medical diagnosis, but it is a very real and powerful human experience. It is the predictable result of prolonged isolation, of confinement, of monotony, and of a deep, unfulfilled longing for the sun. It begins subtly, a general feeling of lethargy, of weariness that sleep does not seem to cure. The familiar, repetitive chores, hauling water, chopping wood, mending clothes, which were once a source of comfort and rhythm, now feel like a pointless, endless drudgery. Then the irritability sets in. The small enclosed space of the one-room cabin becomes a pressure cooker for human emotion. The same faces, seen day after day, every hour of every day, lose their familiar comfort. Small habits that were once endearing now become sources of intense irritation. The way a husband chews his food, the sound of a child's restless whining, the constant, scratchy presence of another human being in your small personal space. Tempers grow short. Arguments flare up over nothing, a spilled cup of water, a misplaced tool. Sharp, cutting words are spoken in the dim, smoky light, words that are hard to take back. A sullen, resentful silence can descend upon the family, a silence that is heavier and more oppressive than the great, natural quiet outside. There is a feeling of being trapped. The four walls of the cabin seem to be closing in. The low ceiling feels lower every day. A desperate restlessness takes hold, a powerful physical urge to escape, to run, to do something other than sit and wait for the snow to melt. A man might go outside and chop wood with a furious, almost manic energy, not because the wood is needed, but simply to feel the burn in his muscles, to break the spell of the indoor confinement. Sleep offers little escape. The dreams are often anxious, filled with a vague sense of dread. One might wake in the middle of the night with a pounding heart, the silence of the room feeling more like a threat than a comfort. For some, the cabin fever can slide into a deeper, darker depression. A profound sense of hopelessness can set in. The winter feels like it will never end. The sun feels like a distant memory. The world feels like it has been permanently bleached of all color and all warmth. The pioneers had no language of psychology to describe this experience. They might have called it the winter blues or simply a sour temper. But they understood its dangers. They knew that the winter could test the mind as much as the body. They fought it with the only tools they had, with work, with stories, with songs, with a stubborn, almost blind faith that spring would eventually return. Cabin fever was the final, and in some ways the most difficult trial of the winter. It was the battle that was fought not against the snow and the wind, but against the silent, encroaching wilderness within.
Storm forecasting, animal signs, and gut feelings. In a world without satellites, without radar, without a meteorologist on the evening news, how did a pioneer predict the weather? How did they know when a life-threatening blizzard was about to descend upon the plains? They did not have science, but they had something else, a deep, intimate, and hard-won literacy of the natural world. They learned to read the sky, the wind, and the behavior of animals like a book that could tell them of a coming storm. This was not a mystical power, it was a skill born of necessity and of careful, sustained observation. A pioneer's life depended on their ability to anticipate the weather, to know when to bring the livestock into the barn, when to reinforce the roof, and when not to venture far from home. The sky was the first and most important page of the book. They learned to recognize the subtle signs of a coming storm. A mare's tail cloud, a thin, wispy cirrus cloud, could be a sign of an approaching weather front. A ring around the moon at night, caused by ice crystals in the upper atmosphere, was a classic and often reliable predictor of snow within a day or two. The color of the sunrise and sunset was also a vital clue. The old proverb, "Red sky at night, sailors delight. Red sky in morning, sailors take warning," was a piece of folk wisdom based on the way light scatters through moisture in the atmosphere. The wind was the next chapter. A pioneer would be acutely aware of the prevailing wind direction. They knew that a steady wind from the south might bring warmer, more stable weather. But a sudden shift, a wind that began to blow from the north or northwest, was a cause for immediate concern. This was the direction of the Arctic cold, the direction from which the great blizzards came. They would feel the change in the quality of the wind, its new, sharp, biting edge. The behavior of animals was another crucial indicator. The pioneers living in close proximity to both domestic and wild animals learned to read their subtle cues. Before a major storm, cattle might become restless, huddling together for warmth and protection long before the first snowflakes fell. Horses might become skittish and nervous. Wild animals were even more sensitive. The behavior of birds was a key sign. Crows might fly low and in tight, silent formations. Smaller birds might disappear entirely, having taken shelter in the thickest parts of the woods. The sudden, eerie silence of a landscape that is usually filled with birdsong was a powerful and unsettling omen. Even the smoke from their own chimney was a clue. On a day with stable, high pressure, the smoke would rise straight up. But if the smoke hung low to the ground and swirled, it was a sign of a low-pressure system moving in, the kind that brings storms. And then there were the gut feelings, the internal barometers. An old-timer might feel a change in the weather in his arthritis joints. A deep ache in a poorly healed bone could be a more reliable forecast than any other sign. This was the body's own memory of past storms, its own intimate connection to the rhythms of the atmosphere. This was not a perfect science. Sometimes the signs were wrong. Sometimes a storm would appear with a terrifying speed that no one could predict. But, more often than not, this deep observational knowledge was enough. It was a language of survival, a way of being in conversation with the world. It was the quiet wisdom of a people who knew that their lives depended on listening very carefully to what the wind and the sky had to say. The sound of the
Trading and bartering. Winter economy. The official economy of dollars and cents often faded into the background. Coin was scarce, and there were few stores to spend it in. In its place, a much older and more intimate form of economy re-emerged, the economy of trade and barter. A family's survival often depended not on the money they had, but on the skills they possessed and the goods they could create, and on the strength of their relationships with their few distant neighbors. The winter economy was an economy of need. It was a complex web of exchanges, of favors given and returned, of a community looking after its own in a world where there was no other safety net. Let us imagine a visit between two neighboring homesteads. The journey itself is a major undertaking, a multi-mile trek on snowshoes or in a horse-drawn sleigh, planned for a clear, cold day. The visit is a welcome break from the monotony and isolation of the winter. The two families gather around the stove, sharing a pot of coffee and the latest news. But the visit is also a business transaction. The visiting family has brought something to trade. Perhaps the woman is a particularly skilled knitter. She has brought a pair of thick, warm woolen mittens, her needles having worked tirelessly through the long winter evenings. The host family has had good luck with their chickens this winter. They have a small surplus of eggs, a precious source of protein when fresh meat is scarce. A deal is struck. The mittens are traded for a dozen eggs. No money changes hands. It is a simple, direct exchange of skill for produce. This kind of bartering happened constantly. A man who was a skilled carpenter might trade a well-made wooden bucket for a sack of potatoes from a neighbor whose root cellar was well stocked. A family that had successfully hunted a deer might trade a portion of the venison for a quantity of flour from a family that had just returned from a trip to the distant grist mill. The value of goods was fluid, determined by immediate need. In the dead of winter, a pound of salt could be worth more than its weight in silver. A few precious candles could be traded for a mended pair of boots. This system was built on reputation and trust. You had to know that the flour you were trading for was not full of weevils, and that the mittens you were receiving were well made and would last the winter. In a small, isolated community, a person's good name was their most valuable currency. This system also extended to the trading posts, the small, lonely outposts of commerce in the wilderness. Here, a trapper might trade a season's worth of beaver pelts, not for cash, but directly for the goods he needed to survive another winter. A new axe head, a bag of lead for his bullets, a twist of tobacco, a barrel of flour. The winter economy was a tangible, human-scale system. It was about the things you could hold in your hand, The things you could see and touch and use. A pair of mittens for your child's cold hands. A dozen eggs for your family's breakfast. It was a system that bound the scattered homesteads together in a network of mutual dependence. It was a quiet, unwritten contract that said, "We are all in this together. Your survival is my survival."
Horses in winter, keeping the animals alive. For the pioneer, an animal was not a pet. It was a partner. It was a tool. It was a lifeline. A good horse was transportation, a plow, and a symbol of status. A milk cow was the source of precious fat and protein for the children. The survival of the family was inextricably linked to the survival of its livestock. And in the brutal cold of frontier winter, keeping these animals alive was one of the most demanding and essential of all chores. The animals could not be left to forage for themselves in the snow-covered landscape. They had to be sheltered. The barn, if the family was fortunate enough to have one, was as important as the house itself. It was often a simple log or timber frame structure, its walls chinked with mud and moss to keep out the worst of the wind. Inside, the air is warm and steamy with the breath of the animals. It smells of hay, of manure, of the warm, comforting scent of horse and cow. This barn is a sanctuary of life in the frozen world. The first and last chore of every single day, without fail, is to care for the animals. In the pre-dawn darkness, the homesteader makes their way to the barn, carrying a lantern. The animals stir at their approach, their soft nickers and low moos a gentle greeting. The most critical task is providing food. The hay that was so laboriously cut and stacked in the late summer is now the animals' only source of sustenance. The pioneer pitches the hay down from the loft, its sweet, dusty smell filling the air. He carefully rations it out, knowing that this supply must last until the spring grass returns. Every wisp is precious. Water is an even greater challenge. The water trough in the barn is often frozen solid in the morning. The ice must be broken with an axe, a jarring, difficult task in the confined space. Fresh water must be hauled from the well or the creek. It is back-breaking work, but it is essential. An animal cannot survive without water. The pioneer's relationship with his animals is intimate and unsentimental. He knows each one by its temperament, its habits. He checks them over each day for any sign of illness or injury. A sick horse or a lame ox is a disaster that can threaten the entire family's livelihood. He will run a hand over a horse's flank, feeling for any loss of weight. He will check a cow's udder, ensuring the milk is flowing well. In the most extreme cold, extra measures are taken. A prized horse might be covered with an old blanket or a piece of burlap to provide an extra layer of warmth. A newborn calf might be brought into the house itself to be kept by the stove for the first critical days of its life, its soft, clumsy presence a temporary addition to the family. There are stories of pioneers caught in a blizzard far from home who would kill their own horse, gut it, and crawl inside the still warm body cavity to survive the storm. It is a grim and terrible image, but it speaks to the profound and complex bond between a human and their animal. The horse, which was their partner in life, becomes their salvation in death. To care for an animal in the winter is a relentless 7-day-a-week responsibility. There are no holidays, no days off. The animal's needs are constant and absolute. But this daily rhythm of care is also a source of comfort, a connection to other living, breathing beings in a world of profound isolation. The warm, steamy air of the barn is a reminder that life, in all its forms, is a stubborn and resilient thing. Winter sickness. No doctors, no medicine, no mercy. In the deep freeze of a frontier winter, the greatest fear was not the blizzard or the wolf, it was sickness. In a world without doctors, without antibiotics, without even a basic understanding of germ theory, A simple illness could quickly become a life-or-death struggle. The winter was a season of profound vulnerability, a time when the body's own defenses were the only real medicine a person had. The cold itself was a constant assault on the body. Frostbite was a common and serious danger. A hunter who stayed out too long, a child who played in the snow without noticing their numb toes, they could suffer irreparable damage. The affected skin would turn white, then black, and in the worst cases, the frozen limb would have to be amputated, a brutal procedure performed on the kitchen table with a saw and a bottle of whiskey for anesthetic. The dry, cold air, combined with the smoky atmosphere of the poorly ventilated cabin, was a perfect environment for respiratory illnesses. A simple cold could easily progress into bronchitis or pneumonia, which was often a death sentence, especially for the very young and the very old. The sound of a deep, rattling cough in the quiet of the night was a sound of pure dread. The family's medicine cabinet was not a box of pills and syrups. It was a collection of folk remedies, of herbal knowledge passed down through generations, and of simple, desperate hope. The woman of the house was the family doctor. She had a store of dried herbs, gathered from the prairie in the summer, a tea made from willow bark, a natural source of salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin, was used to treat fevers and aches. A poultice of crushed mustard seed might be placed on the chest to try and break up congestion. A hot, steaming broth, made by boiling the bones of a rabbit, was a source of comfort and a little nourishment for a person too weak to eat. Whiskey was the all-purpose medicine. It was used as an antiseptic to clean a wound. It was given to a person with a severe cough to help them sleep. It was the only available painkiller for a broken bone or a toothache. But for the most part, the only treatment for a serious illness was bed rest and prayer. The sick person would be kept as warm as possible, close to the fire, covered in every available blanket. The family would watch over them, offering sips of water, whispering words of comfort, and praying to a God who felt very far away. Sickness in the winter was a family crisis. A sick man could not chop the wood or hunt for food. A sick woman could not cook the meals or care for the children. The burden of work fell on the healthy members of the family, pushing them to the brink of their own endurance. This was a world without mercy. There was no doctor to call, no ambulance to arrive. The body was left to fight its own battle. Sometimes, with luck and a strong constitution, it would win. The fever would break, the cough would subside, and the person would slowly regain their strength. But often the battle was lost. A winter funeral was a bleak and hurried affair. A grave was dug in the frozen ground, a task that could take days of chipping away at the hard, unyielding earth. A simple wooden cross was erected. The family would say their own prayers, their words lost in the wind. The snow would quickly cover the new grave, and the world would go on, a little smaller, a little quieter than it was before. Winter weddings and funerals. Life still happened. Even in the heart of the harshest winter, in a world that seemed to be suspended in a state of frozen animation, the great fundamental rhythms of human life continued. People were born, they fell in love, they married, and they died. These essential milestones were not postponed until the spring. They were observed and honored in the midst of the cold, their rituals adapted to the stark realities of the season. A winter wedding was a rare and joyful occasion, a defiant splash of warmth and color in a gray and white world. It was often a practical affair. A traveling preacher might be passing through the area, and a young couple would seize the opportunity to be formally wed. The ceremony would not be held in a grand church. It would take place in the largest cabin in the small community, usually the home of the bride's parents. The room would be crowded with neighbors who had braved the snow to witness the event. The air would be warm from the stove and thick with the smell of wood smoke and damp wool. The bride would not wear a white gown of silk. She would wear her Sunday best, a simple but clean dress of dark wool, perhaps with a small hand-stitched decorative collar. The groom, likewise, would be in his best wool shirt and trousers. The preacher's words would be simple and direct, his voice a solemn presence in the quiet room. The exchange of vows was a serious promise, a commitment to face the hardships of this life together, a partnership for survival. After the ceremony, there would be a celebration, a feast. This was the true gift of the community to the new couple. Each family would bring what they could spare from their dwindling winter stores, a haunch of venison from a successful hunt, a precious jar of preserved fruit, a freshly baked loaf of bread. There might be music from a fiddle, and if there was enough space, some simple, energetic dancing that would shake the dirt floor of the cabin. A winter wedding was a beacon of hope, a promise of continuity, a defiant celebration of life in the face of the long, dark season. But winter was more often a time of endings. A funeral in the snow was a far more common gathering. It was a stark, quiet, and deeply sorrowful event. When a person died, the community would come together not to celebrate, but to mourn and to help. The neighbors would help the grieving family with the difficult, essential tasks. The men would take turns digging the grave, a brutal, exhausting job in the frozen earth. The women would help wash and prepare the body, and would bring food to the bereaved family, a silent offering of comfort. The burial itself was a brief and bleak ceremony. The simple, homemade wooden coffin would be carried or pulled on a sled to the small, snow-covered graveyard. The family and a few neighbors would gather around the open grave, their figures dark against the white landscape. The preacher, his breath pluming in the cold air, would read a passage from the Bible. The words of comfort and resurrection would sound strange and hollow in the immense cold silence. There were no flowers. There was only the wind and the snow and the quiet grief of the living. Life in all its forms did not pause for the winter. It was simply stripped down to its most essential elements. A wedding was a promise of future labor and future children. A funeral was a quiet return to the cold earth. Both were acts of a community huddled together, finding a way to mark the passages of life in a world that offered no comfort but the one they could make for themselves.
Moonlight hunts, when you had to go out at night. The night on the winter prairie is a realm of deep cold and profound darkness. For the pioneer, it is a time to be indoors, behind a barred door, safe by the fire. But sometimes necessity overrules caution. Sometimes the hunger is too great, or an opportunity too rare to miss. Sometimes a person must venture out into the frozen, moonlit world of the night. A moonlight hunt is an act of quiet desperation. The family's store of meat is gone. The traps have been empty for days. But the night offers a different set of possibilities. Let us imagine a homesteader, his stomach empty, his children's faces pale. He has seen the signs of rabbits near the small grove of trees at the edge of his claim. He cannot risk missing them in the daylight, so he waits for a night with a full moon and a clear sky. He dresses in every layer he owns, his movements slow and deliberate in the quiet of the cabin. He takes his rifle, a single-shot, muzzle-loading weapon. His supply of powder and lead is precious, and every shot must count. He slips out of the cabin, the cold hitting him with a familiar, bracing shock. The world outside is transformed. The full moon, high in the black, star-dusted sky, reflects off the snow, bathing the landscape in a ghostly blue-white light. Every detail is etched in sharp, dark shadow. The world is both beautiful and deeply alien. The silence is absolute.
The only sound is the soft, rhythmic crunch of his own footsteps in the dry, cold snow. He moves slowly, carefully, his senses on high alert. He is no longer a farmer, he is a predator, a part of the silent, nocturnal world of the night. He reaches the grove of trees, their bare branches like skeletal fingers against the sky. He finds a place to wait, perhaps behind a snow-covered rock, his body becoming a part of the frozen landscape. The cold begins to seep into him, a deep, patient cold that numbs his fingers and his toes. He fights it, flexing his hands, shifting his weight. He waits. The moon is his only companion. An owl hoots from a distant tree, its call a lonely, haunting sound. He waits for what feels like an eternity. The hunt is a test of patience, of endurance. And then he sees it. A small, dark shape, hopping out from the brush into the moonlit clearing. A snowshoe hare, its coat almost as white as the snow. His heart begins to beat faster. He slowly, carefully raises his rifle, the cold metal a shock against his cheek. He takes a deep, steadying breath, the mist of it momentarily obscuring his view. He aims. He waits for the perfect moment. The crack of the rifle shot is a violent, explosive sound in the immense silence of the night. It echoes across the prairie and then is gone, swallowed by the snow. He waits a moment, his ears ringing, and then moves forward. In the snow, he finds the small, still form. He feels a pang of regret, but it is quickly replaced by the overwhelming primal relief of a successful hunt. This is food. This is another day of survival for his family. He picks up the rabbit, its body still warm against the cold of his hands, and begins the long, cold walk home, his shadow long and dark behind him on the moonlit snow.
The first signs of thaw, what hope looked like. After months of a world locked in a state of suspended animation, of a landscape that is only shades of white and gray, the first signs of the thaw are small, subtle, and almost miraculous. Hope, in the late frontier winter, does not arrive with a grand announcement. It arrives as a whisper, as a single drop of water, as a subtle shift in the quality of the light. It might begin with a change in the wind. For months, the wind has blown from the north, a sharp, biting, and relentlessly cold presence. And then one day, a person steps outside and feels something different. The wind has shifted. It is coming now from the south, and it carries on it not the sharp edge of ice, but a soft, damp, and almost living quality. It is a breath of a different, warmer world. Then comes the sound. It is a sound that has not been heard for months, and its return is startling. It is the sound of dripping water. From the edge of the sod roof, a single icicle, which has hung like a dagger for months, begins to weep. A single, clear drop of water forms at its tip, hangs for a moment, and then falls. It is followed by another, and another. Soon, a slow, steady, and musical dripping can be heard all along the side of the house. It is the sound of the world beginning to unfreeze. It is the sound of the great ice lock being broken. The sun, which has been a distant, powerless disk in the sky, begins to feel different. It has a new warmth, a new strength. It begins to win its daily battle with the frost. On the south-facing side of the cabin, a small, dark patch of bare earth appears in the snow. It is a tiny island of mud in an ocean of white. And to the pioneer who has seen nothing but snow for 4 months, this small patch of mud is the most beautiful sight in the world. The days grow noticeably longer. The sun rises a little earlier,
It sets a little later. The long, oppressive evenings of candlelight grow shorter. The world is being filled with light again. And then come the signs of life. A flock of geese is seen, a high, wavering V shape against the pale blue sky, making their way north. Their distant, honking calls are a proclamation that the great seasonal cycle is turning once more. A single robin appears, its red breast a shocking, vibrant splash of color against the drab landscape. The creek, which has been a silent, solid road of ice, begins to groan and crack. A thin trickle of meltwater appears on its surface. Within a few days, the trickle becomes a roar as the ice breaks up and the liberated water begins to flow again. These are the small, quiet harbingers of the spring. Each one is noted and treasured and shared. Did you hear the dripping from the roof today? I saw a patch of bare ground by the barn. These small observations are a liturgy of hope. The long siege is ending. The world is coming back to life. The great white silence is being broken by the sound of water and the call of birds. The air itself feels different, filled with the smell of damp earth and the promise of new growth. The pioneer takes a deep breath of this new air. The taste of it is the taste of survival.
Spring at last, surviving another Wild West winter. The soft squelch of mud underfoot. And then, one day, you wake up and you know it is over. The air that comes through the cracks in the door is not cold, but cool. The breath you exhale is no longer a cloud of white. The long, brutal, and unforgiving winter is finally, truly over. You have survived. The feeling is not one of wild, exuberant joy. It is something quieter, deeper. It is a profound, bone-deep sense of relief. It is the feeling of a great weight being lifted from your shoulders, a weight you had been carrying for so long you had almost forgotten it was there. The world is transformed into a world of mud. The melting snow turns the prairie into a vast, shallow lake, the ground a thick, clinging mire. But this mud is not the enemy. It is a sign of life, of the earth awakening from its long, frozen sleep. The smell of it is the smell of renewal. The rhythms of the homestead change. The stove, which has been the raging, hungry heart of the house, is now allowed to burn low. The constant, urgent need to chop wood recedes. The heavy greatcoats and buffalo robes are put away, and the body feels light, free, unencumbered. The door of the cabin can be left open to the air, to the light. The family, which had been huddled together for months, now spills out into the world. The children, their bare feet sinking into the soft mud, run with a new energy, their shouts no longer muffled by the snow. There is a new set of chores. The fields must be prepared for planting. The garden must be tilled. The world is full of the promise of work, but it is a hopeful work, a work of beginnings, not of endings. You look at the faces of your family, pale and thin after the long winter, and you see a quiet strength in their eyes. You have been tested, all of you, by the deepest and most profound challenges of this land. You have faced the cold, the hunger, the isolation, the fear, and you have endured. You have made it through another winter. Not everyone did. You think of the new graves in the small cemetery, and you feel a quiet, somber gratitude for your own life. The survival of a pioneer winter is not a grand, heroic victory. There is no parade, no medal. The victory is small, and it is private. It is the sight of the first green shoot pushing its way through the dark soil. It is the sound of your children's laughter in the spring sun. It is the simple, profound, and undeniable fact that you are still here. You stand in your doorway, the gentle spring breeze on your face, and you look out at the vast greening prairie. The long, quiet war is over, and in the warmth of this new sun, you can finally, truly rest.
Snowed-in Stories, Oral History by the Hearth.
In the long, dark hours of a winter evening, when the blizzard howls outside and the world is reduced to the small, flickering circle of light around the hearth, a different kind of work begins. This is the work of memory, the telling of stories. In a world with few books, no radios, and no connection to the outside world, the family's own history and the folklore of their people become a precious and essential form of entertainment, of education, and of survival. The fire is the theater. The shadows it casts on the rough walls of the cabin are the scenery. The storytellers are the parents and the grandparents. Their voices a low, comforting murmur in the quiet room. The stories they tell are a rich and varied tapestry. There are the ancient folk tales carried over from the old country, from Germany or Ireland or Scandinavia. Tales of cunning foxes, of foolish giants, of brave young men and women who outwit the forces of darkness. These stories are full of a deep, earthy wisdom about the nature of the world, about the importance of courage and kindness. Then there are the stories from the Bible. The family Bible, if they own one, is their most treasured possession. The father or mother might read a chapter aloud, or they might simply tell the stories from memory. The epic tales of the Old Testament, of Noah and the flood, of David and Goliath, of Moses leading his people through the wilderness, resonate deeply with their own lives. They too are a small band of people in a vast and often hostile wilderness, trusting in their faith to see them through. And then there are the most important stories of all, the family stories. The grandparents are the keepers of the family's history. They are the living libraries. They tell the children of the world they left behind, of the green hills of their homeland, of the great cities they once saw. They tell the story of the journey west. They speak of the long, slow, arduous trek by covered wagon, of the great rivers they crossed, of the vast, empty plains, of the first sight of the mountains on the horizon. They speak of the hardships of that journey, the storms, the sickness, the dust, but they also speak of the hope that drove them on, the dream of a new life, of land of their own. They tell the stories of the first years on the homestead, of the building of the sod house, of the breaking of the prairie sod, of the first failed crop and the first successful one. They tell of the neighbors who helped them and of the ones who didn't. They tell of the time the blizzard came and buried the house, of the time the prairie fire threatened to destroy everything. These are not just stories. This is oral history. This is how a child learns who they are, where they come from, and what their family has endured to be here in this small, warm room. The stories are a form of inheritance, a legacy of resilience passed down from one generation to the next. In the telling, the hardships are softened by time. The fear is transformed into a lesson in courage. The loss is woven into a larger narrative of survival. The stories give meaning to their struggle. They frame their small, isolated lives as a part of a great heroic epic. And so, in the deep, snowbound silence of the winter night, the family creates its own world, a world of memory and of meaning. The stories are a fire for the mind, a warmth for the soul, a fragile human light against the vast, dark, and forgetful wilderness.
Wild winter meals, eating what you could. By the time January arrives on the frontier, the initial stores from the autumn harvest and slaughter are beginning to run low. The salted pork in the barrel is dwindling. The smoked venison hanging from the rafters is getting smaller. This is the time of the lean months, when the pioneer diet, already monotonous, becomes a stark and resourceful exercise in eating whatever has calories, whatever can be found, hunted, or trapped in the frozen landscape. The foundation of the diet remains the same: the bread, the porridge, the stored root vegetables. But now, these are supplemented with the wild foods of the winter. For the man of the house, hunting and trapping are not a sport. They are a critical source of fresh protein. He might take his long rifle and a pair of snowshoes and head out into the silent, snow-covered woods. He is not hunting for a great trophy buck. He is hunting for anything that moves. A rabbit is a good prize. Its meat can be turned into a thin but welcome stew, and its fur can be used to line a pair of mittens. A squirrel is a smaller but still valuable addition to the pot. He learns to be a patient, silent hunter, to wait for the small, dark shape to appear against the white of the snow. If he is lucky, he might track a deer. The hunt is a long, slow, and often unsuccessful ordeal. But if he is successful, it is a cause for a great, if quiet, celebration. A single deer can provide fresh meat for a week, and the rest can be smoked or frozen, a vital replenishment of the family's larder. Trapping is another essential skill. He sets snares and small traps along the animal trails he has learned to recognize. He might catch a beaver, prized for its pelt, but also a source of rich, fatty meat, or a muskrat, or even a porcupine. In times of desperation, no source of protein is overlooked. The winter meal, therefore, is often a mystery stew. Into the pot goes whatever has been caught that day, along with the last of the potatoes and onions. A squirrel stew thickened with a little flour is a common and nourishing meal. The taste is gamey, a wild flavor that is a world away from domesticated meat. But what happens when the hunting is poor? What happens in the deepest, leanest part of the winter, when even the rabbits seem to have vanished? This is when the true desperation sets in. This is when the family turns to the last resorts. There is the hardtack, a simple, unleavened biscuit made of flour, water, and salt, baked until it is as hard as a rock. It is almost inedible on its own, but it can be soaked in coffee or stew to make it soft enough to chew. It is a food of pure, long-lasting calories, a food of last resort for soldiers and pioneers. There is the salt pork, the final few pieces at the bottom of the barrel, so salty it makes the mouth pucker, but it is fat, and fat is energy. And in the very worst of times, there are stories of pioneers boiling the leather from their own worn-out moccasins or belts to create a thin, gelatinous broth, a desperate attempt to extract a final ounce of nourishment from a world that seems to have nothing left to give. This is a diet stripped of all pretense. It is about the brutal biological calculus of survival. It is about finding the calories needed to keep the body's internal furnace burning against the overwhelming cold. Every mouthful, whether of savory venison or of bland, tasteless hardtack, is a small, hard-won victory in the long, quiet war of the winter.